This is Lecture 4 on Chapter 3 of Kedushin and Harkness's book. Chapter 3 focuses on administrative supervision, problems, and implementation. And in the very beginning of Chapter 3, they talk about the problem of vicarious liability. And what vicarious liability is concerned with is the doctrine that states that the superior is responsible for the acts of his or her agents within the scope of their employment. The supervisee is legally regarded as an extension of the supervisor, and that the two are considerably a single persona. And they give you some very interesting scenarios and situations regarding vicarious liability. And one significant point that needs to be very well understood by you as future supervisors or existing supervisors at the present, and that is that a worker's incompetent is an indictment of the supervisor. You are held accountable for what your supervisees know or don't know, or what they do. NASW has adopted guidelines. The National Association of Social Workers has adopted guidelines and ethical standards for social work supervision, which these guidelines apply in other areas as well, in our field. And that is the obligation of the supervisor to provide information for supervisees to obtain information, consent, informed consent from their clients, identify errors made by supervisees, oversee workers' efforts to develop and implement comprehensive planned interventions, know when supervisees' clients must be reassigned, transferred, or have services terminated, know when supervisees need consultation, monitor the workers' competence addressing incompetence, impairment, and ethical lapses, monitor the boundaries between supervisors, workers, and clients, review and critique workers' paperwork and case records, provide supervisees with regularly scheduled supervision, document supervision provided, avoid dual relationships with workers, and provide workers with timely and informative feedback and evaluate their performance. Now let me make this clear. This was provided by Reamer in 1998 regarding the obligations of the supervisor. NASW has adopted guidelines and ethical standards for social work supervision. Okay, but these are very significant points and very important points regarding the doctrine of vicarious liability. And vicarious liability places the supervisor in a very vulnerable position. And so you as a supervisor need to always be very conscious that these cases belong to you and they don't belong to the staff person. I mean, that's why they're hired. They're an extension of you. The problem of authority and power. And in this slide, what we're talking about is what Harkness and what Kedushin and Harkness talk about in terms of the rationale for authority and power. 4 key points. The rationale for authority and power is that it is agency-driven from organizational complexity and task specialization. The agency gives you your authority and your power in terms of your scope of responsibilities and what it is that you can do as a supervisor. It is community-driven, reflecting what the community wants. That's pretty self-explanatory. The community is requesting certain services, the agency is providing these services, and you as a supervisor are making sure that these services are provided through your staff. It's legally driven by legislative statutes. The statutes, whether they're state, federal, or local laws, drive what it is that the services are going to be and how they're going to be mandated in terms of the provision of these services. And you as a supervisor have a responsibility to understand these legal mandates. And they're driven by common good and collective goals. There is this common good, there is this collective goal in terms of why and how we want to have services delivered to our clients. And you as a supervisor have that responsibility and need to be fully aware of that as well. 5 basic rights of supervisory authority. the right that legitimizes the use of power. You're given this right by the mere fact that you are the supervisor. And as a supervisor, you have the right to issue directives, exercise control, and require compliance. You have the right to have set expectations for which you will inspect to make sure that it is done. Two key words in supervision that I'll reiterate several times. You cannot inspect if you do not have an expectation. And so you have a right to make sure that that expectation is being met. The right to determine the behavior of others and to make decisions. The right to determine whether your staff are appropriately behaving within the context of agency guidelines, and that they're doing and making good judgment calls. The right to demand obedience. The right for you to demand respect from your subordinates. And the right that legitimizes the use of power. And we'll talk later about authority and power, but you have the right to use power as a supervisor to get things done through your staff. And we'll talk more clearly about that later. The sources of supervisory authority, again, to reiterate, is depending upon the administrative structure of the agency. That's how you get your source, whether you're in a division, whether you're a special unit, whether you're part of a division or unit. For example, in my case, I'm the Deputy Chief Probation Officer, and I have 7 staff that report to me, and they have staff that report to me, to them. And because of the structure, I have this particular authority, and my staff have authority that's given to them. There are professional mandates that gives you supervisory authority. I am a licensed independent social worker supervisor. I have that status professionally through the state licensure board. Other individuals, depending upon where they're at and their state requirements, may have professional mandates that license them to be supervisors. And the consent of client gives you supervisory authority in terms of you only have as much authority as what the client gives you or what people give you. Okay? There is a difference between authority and power, and you need to be well aware of this. Defined, authority is the right that legitimizes the use of power. You have this authority as a supervisor. You have this power, which says the ability to implement the authority. Okay, and that's the difference. Now let's talk about this more clearly in this slide, as written in your book, Caducean and Harkness. The distinction between authority and power is illustrated in terms of the distinction between a priest and a judge. Very simple. The judge can condemn sinners to hell, but there's a question about his power to enforce the verdict, while a judge can condemn people to hang, and it will happen. Okay, we don't know where purgatory's at. Canute's law: even a priest cannot control the tides. So, simply stated, authority is the right to supervise. Power is the ability to effectively exercise that right. Authority can be delegated. Power cannot be delegated. Okay, you don't delegate power. It's a tool that's used by the supervisor.